worked on a whole bunch of Batman stuff over the years, including a Batman video game and more.
You can talk about New Teen Titans because it's a superhero panel.
Yeah.
You're good.
Yeah. So anybody else, is there a particular age of, gold, silver, bronze, modern age that you want to revisit some of those themes, or are you pretty happy with where you're at now?
She's asking about if there's a particular style from one of the other ages that we would want to revisit. I mean, I feel like me and Adriana are kind of doing that with Female Furies, where we're really trying to honor, Kirby and his style, and I think Hi-Fi with their colors as well are doing such an incredible job of making it really feel like it's like an 80s comic, actually, I think. And I think that makes it really fun. And one thing that I really like is how Adriana seems to be channeling sort of Kirby, but sort of putting her own spin on it, and having some gentleness with some hard situations that are happening in the book. And I think that, there are a lot of flashbacks, or there are a bunch of flashbacks, and I like the fact that we're doing them sort of more colored rather than a sort of sepia tone or something like that. And, for me, when I was growing up, before I knew how to read, my parents had gotten me these Superman and Batman omnibuses from the Golden Age and stuff, and that's how I sort of cut my teeth on sort of learning to read visually. So I'm always really attracted to that kind of huge color splash, big, sort of simple but big.
Do you want to, there might be folks in the room who are not familiar with the characters in Female Furies, do you want to give them a quick refresher?
Sure. So Female Furies are an elite fighting force for Darkseid, who, as we know, is a big bad. And they live on Apokolips, and they're part of, sort of that. Their commander-in-chief is Granny Goodness, who is she ran the Terror Orphanage on Apokolips, and it's part of Jack Kirby's Fourth World, which is this sort of epic, Wagnerian, operatic, sweeping, beautiful story that also includes Mr. Miracle and Big Barda. She's one of the Female Furies. That's all I'll say.
Awesome. Marv, is there a particular era that you would want to revisit with any new books? Do you want to go back to Gold Age? Do you want to stick with
what era of Batman?
Any superhero.
It's just a DC superhero.
Yeah.
It's not Batman, yeah.
Any superhero, what era? Each era of comics has had something that was a lot of fun, that was a lot of interest. I love the 60s. Because it was the first time they experimented with different ideas. They broke out of the standard type of comics. I would say the golden age of comics is actually the last 10 years, including now, because some of the best comics ever done have been done recently. Really great writing, really great art in it. So I actually like the era that we're in right now.
Firm endorsement.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I've always wondered a little bit more about is, we're talking a lot about characters that have decades and decades of history, right? Some of these characters have been around since the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. How do you think you can keep superhero stories fresh, especially when these characters have been around for so long?
I mean, the world kind of helps you out with that, because you have to, I think with a lot of the DC characters, the key is to keep the core of the character the same, but, Clark Kent is going to be a reporter, well, now he's going to work for probably BuzzFeed, right? And that's terrible, but that's, the world kind of helps you update the characters and then ask new questions about, what their place in the world would be. If they don't change at their heart and the world changes around them, then you have conflict and then you have story.
Wait, I wrote that down.
I think for me as a lady, when I'm considering something like writing so far women characters, I'm trying to look at the cracks, the invisible cracks that haven't been looked at before, and sort of pulling that up into the story that I'm telling to bring it more into the modern era.
Yeah, I always find you have some of the Man and Superman material that I just did up here now, but if you center on character and make the character fit the time period, whether you're specifically doing something in the past or in the present, but if the character is real, if you treat the character correctly, the stories will fall into place because you're telling the story about a man or a woman, and the plotting and everything else will fit the character. And as you grow a character, as the decades go by, and the character is going to change simply because different people are working on it, and also because there's almost no way to avoid it, even if you try. The book will grow to the correct decade, to the correct year, because we're working on it, and we want to find something that's memorable and something that we care about. So we're going to write to the time period that we're in. Even if we're doing a story set in the Revolutionary War, it's still going to have characters who are acting the way we want to make a point. So you keep your characters fresh, and you keep thinking them, and you don't just do what you've always done. You have to keep thinking of what it is today that's of interest. If I may for a second, when I was doing the Titans, every year there was this website, and I wish I could find it now, that was headed by, if you were born on this year, and you're going into college this year, here is what you know, and here is what you don't know. And when the majority of people didn't know about dial phones, you realize something is there. I always kept those lists because it said what we are today, not what we were 5 years ago. And you have to keep that on. You have to keep that on time.
That's pretty amazing. I like that.
Yeah, I wish I could find that website. I saw it for years, but I've forgotten the name.
I also feel like we're, the audience, like myself as a consumer, like we're more sophisticated in the way that we're consuming stories, and I think that plays into the way that we write stories, because I think that we can all handle much deeper, much more complex stories. Not that, the past didn't have complex and deep stories, shout out to, Homer, but, but
Not Homer Simpson, but actual Homer. I just want to clarify that for anyone in the audience.
This is where we need your website. What would you know if you were... but I think that's part, we're ready for different kinds of stories, and I think that helps us, also when we're building our stories now.
And so when we started, we were talking about superheroes as being morally aspirational. And then you were all talking about how things change as time goes on. So how do you navigate those changing moral aspirations as time goes on?
Well, maybe that's why, that speaks to what Tim was saying, where now they're all sort of, fighting over what whose version of right is right.
Yeah.
Tim already answered it. Cool.
Well, I mean, also, I think, sometimes I don't want to get too political with it, but I do think there was an era in which we all agreed like fascism was bad, and there was an era in which we all agreed certain things, that there was an American identity that we had, and I think a lot of these characters were created in that. And now we kind of live in a world where we don't agree on the facts or the news or the politics. So I think maybe the next era of superheroes has to be the idea that maybe we have to come back together on the things that we agree on. Maybe that's the idea.
Do you think part of that shift was partly caused by all of the publishers walking away from the Comics Code Authority relatively recently?
I don't think it has anything to do with Comics Code. I think it's just, I think people still like superheroes. I mean, the movie theaters are full of them. So people still love superheroes. People still love aspirational hero stories. I don't think we've changed that much, I think it's just the access of a medium, I think, maybe more than anything. And obviously in the 80s, everybody went, well, I wish we were more respected, and I wish we were, not just kids stuff, so they made stuff for adults, which made some great stories, but also maybe pushed superheroes away from, what their actual appeal is, maybe. I don't know, that's just a thought. I'm not saying Watchmen ruined anything. I'm just.
No, but I think it's a valid question whether or not didn't ruin anything, but I think that it might have had unintended consequences.
Yes, I think so. Well, by people who didn't get it. You know, I think sometimes people read Dark Knight Returns or Watchmen and are like, isn't it great when superheroes are total jerks? But they don't get it. That's not what it's about at all. So yeah, I mean, it just depends, I think. I just don't think we've changed as people that we don't still think, you know, I mean, the fact that Captain America and Batman and stuff still are relevant and no one thinks they're old-fashioned is great.
Well, that's what I think is so great about, you know, superheroes in general, is that they are our new mythologies. They are sort of what we, you know, what we can crack and reinvent and look at many different, you know, points of view. And I think they're so great because they're so flexible, you know, because they are so iconic and their center of the characters are so, you know, solid.
So kind of going to what Tim was saying about, you know, this hero is just a jerk. How do you differentiate between a superhero versus an anti-hero?
Oh, man. I mean, you can certainly have a
I was trying to think, you
superhero.
said jerk, and so I was trying to think of Guy Gardner, like, my answer involved Guy Gardner in some way, but,
Well, because superheroes can have flaws. Guy's still a superhero. He's a jerk.
He's not an anti-hero.
He's not an anti-hero. I don't know, I mean, anti-hero is weird because I guess the anti-hero just means...
doing wrong things for the right reason, maybe, I guess?
Yeah. Or the right things for the wrong reason.
For the wrong reason.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think...
You know, the Punisher, like, he just, doing the right, I see what you're saying.
Well, they're not, like, because I think...
A reluctant hero? Like a reluctant do-gooder or something?
That's not like an anti-hero. I think maybe anti-hero is kind of ruined. Maybe that term doesn't mean anything anymore. Like that, you know what I mean? Because I kind of think of like Death Wish and Bernie Gates in the real world, or just the idea that like someone took the law into their own hand. We agree that that's bad, but we're rooting for them, right? Mm-hmm. So that kind of idea, you know, maybe that's it.
So maybe a disconnect between that moral center that we talked about and the way that they're going about connecting to that moral center.
Yeah.
I think for me, if a hero or superhero goes into action without being prompted, she, is going to solve a problem because it's the right thing to do. The anti-hero goes, damn it, I don't want to do this, I guess I got it, you know, and begrudgingly does it all. But where they come from is at a very different place, even if they're going to solve the same problem.
It feels like that might be the root of a lot of those super fights that you were mentioning, Tim, of like the folks that want to do the right thing out of some impetus of their own versus the folks that are kind of being sucked into a situation that they might not want to be in.
A proactivity versus reactivity.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely like the core of a lot of 90s comics. You know, it was always like, X-Force says, we're going to take this to the road, we're going to beat these guys before they do it. Like, you see that kind of moral thing show up around that era, I think, you know.
Not to bring it back to Watchmen, but who watches the Watchmen?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
Who polices the people with the superpowers?
Right, exactly, yeah.
One of the other things that a lot of you folks have worked on is legacy characters. So characters that are second generation or third generation inheritors of a title, someone that has worked under another hero. And how do you kind of navigate those difficult waters of this is a new character or a character in a new role in this beloved situation that people might not be ready for?
Marv, you were the master of this.
Legacy heroes.
Legacy heroes.
So like navigating a Robin taking on a new role or adding new characters to the Teen Titans, you know, how do you navigate the reader's expectations with the history of these characters?
It always comes down to me, at least, with who the character is, what they do, how they think. And I do extensive note-taking while I'm creating a character so that I understand how they're going to react to any given thing. That allows you to create, in the case of Robin you talk about, I did Tim Drake and moved the other one into a different realm by making him older. And it's because it was correct for the age group of Dick Grayson to want to give up those stupid little green pants. And and it was correct for Tim Drake, who was horrified to see Dick Grayson's parents die because he happened to be 2 years old when his parents took him to the circus, and he witnesses this traumatic event that never leaves his head. So everything is built into the character, and you grow them in that fashion. Again, with someone like Tim Drake, previous characters wanted to be Batman, he wanted to be Robin. So you already have somebody who you're feeling good about because you can understand him wanting to grow up and to become this great person, and you could, I'm not phrasing it right, but that's how I do it.
Makes sense to me.
Well, it's also tough because I think by design, most of the big two superheroes and DC characters specifically are not supposed to change and age a lot. But the readers kind of want to see their characters that they grew up with graduate. They want them to change with them. So you kind of have a conflict sometimes where, you know, the readers, like every era gets to grow up with Dick Grayson and watch him become Nightwing, right? Like when Marv did it in the 80s, and then you had the kids who grew up on Batman animated series, and then you had, you know, film series. Like everyone gets to watch Dick graduate to Nightwing. But that also has inherent problems, because then what do you do with Nightwing, right? Like if you were going to change these characters, you have to make him Batman eventually, right? And so Grant Morrison did that story, and it's great, but eventually you have to change him back to Nightwing, because that's what people really like. So it's hard with these massive ongoing superhero stories to the illusion of change versus actual change is kind of tough to do. And even like when we did Grayson, it was a very logical growth for the character to become something else. And I think it worked really good, but in the end, he's got to go back to the tights and the blue on it because that's what you guys like. So, you know, it's a weird part of the job sometimes. I'm sure you've seen that, both of you have.
Yeah, it's like you have to find a way to change things without changing anything.
Right.
I don't know, is Hawkman a legacy character? Is he like his own legacy?
He's his own legacy.
He's his own
man.
legacy.
It's just straight line.
If you guys want to spend like 25 minutes just being confused by comics, go read the Hawkman Wikipedia entry and your mind will just...
But that was actually how, because like I was saying earlier, I didn't grow up reading comics, and so when they asked me to pitch for Hawkman, I went to Wikipedia, just like I do with any character, and started reading. And never having read the different versions, all I knew was this massive reputation he had for being hugely confusing, which is why I wanted to do it, right?
Yeah, that's why you're the right guy.
It's like the ultimate challenge, you know? And so I'm reading it, and I was like, oh, I get it. He reincarnates across time and space, and the cop is just another version of him from another life. He just does. And then they never said that. And I was like, oh, well, I guess it's my story then, you know? Whereas, like, if I had read Hawkman my whole life, I would have known that Carter Hall and Katar Hall can never intersect, and they have to be separate and all this kind of stuff. And so now, you know, what you're looking at here is, you know, Brian and I expanded it beyond just the ancient Egyptian prince, who you see there, Prince Khufu, and then Katar Hol, who's over here, the Thanagarian, but we added a Kryptonian and Iranian, who's the one who looks like the Rocketeer right there, and a little dude from the Microverse, and like all these different versions. You know, he's been everywhere and he's done everything. So I don't know if that makes him a legacy hero or not, because it's all
It does.
It's all just him.
Yeah, he's a self-legacy hero.
I will say, if anybody ever calls you a fake fan for not knowing something and going and looking it up on Wikipedia, I feel like this is perfectly legitimate. Like, no, that's real. I know this character. Up on Wikipedia. So I kind of want to dig into if there. You said something about when you get Dick Grayson from Robin to Nightwing, then eventually you have to do something else, right? He can't just like chill out. He has to like go keep moving.
Yeah.
And you said the next step is to make him be Batman. Do we think that these like tentpole characters as aspirational moral superheroes are also the aspirations of other heroes in their universes?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly true for like the Flash, right? Like that was Wally's whole thing, is he wanted to be the Flash. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's, you know, if you look at the creation of a lot of DC characters, Robin exists because they smartly went, kids kind of like Batman, but at least they're kind of, they don't relate to him. He's their dad, right? So you make Robin, and he's your access point to the DC universe, specifically to Batman. So a lot of these characters they're supposed to be you, right? Wally is the reader. He's the guy who grew up on the Flash, like you. And so you want to be Wally because you could be the Flash someday. And having Robin, you know, or Superboy, they're for the kids to be the character.
Or Supergirl, just one.
Or Supergirl, yeah, absolutely, yeah. The problem is, now we've kind of gotten rid of some of that stuff because it's deemed a little silly or something, and we sort of segregated the age range of readership. So we're like, well, kids read these comics and adults read these. So there isn't that need for that accents and point character as much, which is kind of a bummer, I
It
would
is
say.
a bummer, yeah.
But, I mean, I think that's so much of the DC legacy is based on that. And Tim Drake, you know, who is exactly that. It was give kids in the 90s a reason, an entry point to the Batman world. And it worked great. I mean, Batman in the 90s was a huge seller. So it was because of what they did. And they gave that, you know, a new guy who doesn't have the same story, and you can move those other people. It's just sort of always moving readers around to characters that they relate to.
I think the reason I wanted to ask it specifically is I was thinking about Shade the Changing Girl and Shade the Changing Woman is there is an arc for her to go through, but her arc does not conclude with her turning into Shade the Changing Man, who she is theoretically the legacy character of.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say, like, Shade the Changing, you know, because I was like, I'm still new at doing superheroes, and I was like, oh wait, Shade. I mean, Shade is a superhero, like I said before, but I think with Shade the Changing Girl, when I met with Gerard Way, who was doing the pop-up imprint of Young Animal, there was only one sentence. It was, you know, alien possesses body of 16-year-old girl who's a bully. And there was no other direction than that. And it could have been Rack if I'd wanted it to be, if I just wanted to do a gender swap, but I really we wanted it to be its own character so that there was like a whole new way to enter into the fabulous world of Ditko's Shade and Milligan's Shade, but to create our own sort of landscape for it. And then it seemed natural to have Loma Shade be obsessed with Rack Shade, who's the original, you know, Shade, so that there was still a connection, like a very deep connection between the two characters, but that then Loma Shade could have her own growth. And she's a girl, and so I know that like a lot of teenagers, you know, are really into it because, you know, it's high school and it's, you know, craziness and it's like you're an alien, and when you're a teenager you feel like an alien, and so, you know, that was really cool. But then we did a time jump where she's a woman, and if you ever read it and you see at the end of Shade the Changing Woman, there's another change that happens. And one of the things that I really wanted to do was I wanted to make it a character where a baton could be passed to different people, and that different people could come in and enter into the character.
But it sounds like those legacies, regardless of where they come from, are always acting as that entry point, right? They're a gateway into a large story and a large history that someone might not be familiar with. And kind of to Robert's point of, if you walk into a comic book shop and you've never been in one before and you see Detective Comics 987 and you're like, oh God, where am I starting with this? I don't know what's going on. Versus having Shade the Changing Girl 1
Right.
and 12 issues to learn about these characters, or Nightwing 1 or Grayson 1, where you get that entry point and then you can go explore this larger world.
Right, and then you don't have to know everything about, you know, I think something that's really intimidating when you have these long series and stuff like that is you don't know where to enter, and you're like, well, I guess I'll never know. I mean, I think another, you know, book that does that really well is Tom King's Mr. Miracle. You know, I mean, I think a lot of people didn't really know what the Fourth World was. Sure, they know some of the characters maybe from the cartoons or Darkseid or whatever, but you know, you've got, you know, it's a very easy into that world, and then you get the joy of exploring, you know, Kirby's amazing universe.
Well, we have a perfect test person on this question. Is you didn't start reading comics till 2000. You were not a kid. So did you feel intimidated to pick up a book? Is that why you picked up #1?
For sure, yeah. Like I went into the shop and I was just like, you know, I knew about Superman and stuff like that. You know, Chris Reeves was my Superman.
Sure.
Christopher Reeve, I call him Chris.
Yeah. You guys are tight like
Yeah,
that.
he was my Superman, watching the films and things like that. And I knew about Batman and Spider-Man from TV shows or films, or I think Captain America had a weird TV show for a little while when I was a
In
kid.
the 70s, yeah.
So other than that, I didn't know anything. So to go into a comic book shop and to see, like she said, Batman number, you know, Detective 997, I was like, I don't know where to be. Because my mindset is I want to know the whole thing, you know? So like, I just gravitated towards whatever had a #1 on it. And
Because it's interesting, because when I was a kid, that's all we had was Spider-Man 237 and Batman 428 or whatever, and that's what I bought. It didn't bother me. It must not have bothered you either, Marv, right? I mean, you were picking stuff up that was... What was your first comic? What was your first superhero comic?
What was my first comic?
Your superhero comic.
That you read.
Oh, Superman.
But what issue? Do you
It was
remember?
based because of the TV show.
Okay, was it like a number 1?
Oh, no.
See, yeah. It's like,
But I would say that
I
back
wasn't
then,
even born, you know.
yeah. No, I mean, I know, but I know. I just,
Do I look that old?
I'm with you, yeah.
but no, I think that back then, like especially in the Silver Age, well, reading the Hawkman stuff I read from the Silver Age, it was all self-contained.
It was also
You know, every issue was a number 1, even if it didn't say number 1.
Yeah.
When I'm reading comics in the 2000s, it was into the multiple issue arcs,
Yeah.
all that
6
kind of
issue.
stuff. Yeah.
Yep, that's true.
I think it's great that you brought up like TV and movies though, because I think especially now there are so many people coming in from movies, or Batman the Animated Series was my first introduction to a superhero.
You're not the only one.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
40% of the people in this room came in on Batman the Animated Series.
And I feel like the conversation about those legacy heroes being the entry point of if you
Yeah.
saw Dick Grayson on the Batman and the Animated Series, and then you could walk in and pick up New Teen Titans and go, I know what I'm getting. I know exactly where I'm at. I know who these characters are and I'm excited about it.
Yeah, and I think that's the really important thing is that, like I'm just thinking of like, how there's going to be all these amazing kids who are watching DC superhero girls right now. And, that like they're going to look at all of those characters and they know what the core of those characters are. And so when they do discover the book, that doesn't change. Even though maybe the sort of the lens that we look at it or the age range changes, the core of those characters don't change.
Do you mind if I ask you guys, what was your first superhero encounter? Was it a book? Was it a TV show? Was it a
The
movie?
first one I remember concretely is seeing Superman 2 in the theater, and I was just at that right age where when he steps out of the particle chamber and Zod's like Neil, I thought Superman lost his powers. I didn't know what the world was going to do. Superman lost his powers, and he crushes his hand, and it just made such a huge impact on me. But I had a lot of older brothers, so I can't say if I saw that before or after I saw whatever the Spider-Man TV show was.
Right.
Yeah.
That road, didn't they have? Didn't it like a?
It was on the Electric Company.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there was also like a
Cartoon
like
too.
almost like a rotoscope Spider-Man
Yep.
cartoon too. So
Oh, yeah,
I can't remember what was what,
But that Superman moment like carved a groove. in
burned
you.
into my head.
Yeah.
Never, yeah.
I think for me, mine was either a toy or a comic first. It was Spider-Man for sure, and then followed by Batman. And I always remember, like the vague memory I have of this stuff was my mom ordered me this Mego set of toys. It was a Spider-Mobile, but it came with Spider-Man and Robin. I don't know why. But it was like Spider-Mobile.
She get down to the thrift store and she just grabbed a Robin and like stuck him.
Yeah, it wasn't. It was like from this. It was a Mego thing, so maybe I don't know what happened, but I loved it. But I always think, then I used to drive around with Robin in this Spider-Mobile, and eventually I rode Robin as an agent of Spiral with a web thing. It's like, oh, I've been working on this my whole life. Yeah, it was definitely like toys for me, or the first stuff was like a Spider-Man comic, or one of those Batman digests. DC used to put up these black and white digests of stuff, and it was like $2, and it would just have like 100 pages of stuff in it. So yeah, it was definitely that stuff.
For me, it was Batman, Adam West's Batman. I loved him so much that I invited him to my 4th birthday party. And,
Did he respond? Did he respond?
No, he didn't. And then my mom was like, well, let me tell you the story. So my mom was like, I put the invitation, I just wrote Batman, Batcave, and I put it in the mailbox with a stamp. And my mom was very worried because she was like, this is gonna break her heart, And I was like, no, Mom, don't worry. Batman loves me. He's coming to my birthday party. So my mom sewed a Batman costume for my dad and said to my dad, be quiet, don't say a word, come in, give her some bat binoculars and get out of Dodge. And so Batman did indeed show up to my 4th birthday party.
Perfect nerd parenting.
And that was the year I was 4, and that was when my parents got me those omnibuses of Superman and Batman which is before I could read, you know, because I was so in love with Batman, and that brought me into comics.
I feel like you all should be taking notes. Like every single person in this room that has a child or wants a child should be taking notes of what just happened.
Thanks, Mom!
Marv, do you remember your very first superhero?
Your first superhero thing.
Like experience, you know, like
A book or
a comic or a film, yeah.
The first one was Superman, as I mentioned, if that was what you're
Yeah,
referring to.
TV show.
I saw that on TV purely by accident. My friend and I were watching some other show, and back then you didn't have remote controls yet, actually. You know, during the Stone Age, you had to get up and change the channels manually, and we didn't get up after the end of our show, and the very next show was Superman, and we're going, what is this? Because he's flying in the opening credits and all of this sort of stuff, and at the end it said it was based on the comic book. And the two of us just got up, I think we were 5, 6, 7, something like that, walked to the corner and bought the first Superman comics that we had. So totally from that, and I think it's the reason why that character and the purity of that character and what he represents is why I still think of him as the best of the superheroes, not only the first.
Your Man and Superman book was awesome, by the way. That was a wonderful Superman story. I just want to tell you that because I really liked
That
it.
comes directly from all of those. All of the Superman experiences are somehow mentioned in that book, whether it's from the old show or the movies. There's lines to say Superman's of all ages, not just today, but he can